Hey everyone, how's it going? So today, first, welcome to the Periscope, and thanks for joining me. I'm JenniferBlanchard. I'm an author and a story coach. I work with serious emerging novelists who want to save time, cut years off their learning curves, and write better stories so that they can get published faster. So today, I'm going to do a deconstruction, basically breaking down the story structure for one of my favorite books. It's called Remember Me. It's by Sophie Kinsella. She's a best-selling novelist, and it's a girl book. Sorry to any guys that are watching, but I just think that the structure in this story is so good, and it's so creative because of the type of story that it is. So I just wanted to, use this as kind of an example, and so I'm going to get started. If anyone has questions throughout, just put them in the chat box, and I'm happy to answer them for you. This is the book that I'm deconstructing, so it's called Remember Me. And at a surface level, it seems that this book is about a girl who loses her memory and gets, amnesia and has to basically put her life back together. But there's really something going on a lot deeper than that, because at the surface level, that's not enough for a story. And I think that's where a lot of writers get tripped up, is that they think they can just, write something that's kind of episodic and make it work, but it really doesn't. So before I start, I wanted to share a quote from my story coach and one of my favorite writers, Larry Brooks. And he says, "A good story is not a documentary of a situation. A good story takes us on a journey with a hero toward resolution through confrontation, action, courage, cleverness, risk-taking, and the conquering of both inner and outer demons." Or antagonists, rather. So whether you call it an inner demon and outer antagonist, it's really the same thing. There has to be something at stake in a story. It can't just be a story about a girl who loses her memory and has to piece her life back together. Because while that may be interesting to some people, that's not enough to drive a story, and it's certainly not enough for a best-selling novel, which is what this is. So I'm going to explain how she does it in such a clever and amazing way. But before I start, I want to show you this, because see, I separated the 4 parts of story on here to show exactly where they land. So each color represents part 1, 2, 3, and 4 as we go across the story. And I've written orphan, wanderer, warrior, and martyr, which is the different contexts for character in each of these parts. But you see how the novel has the structure pieces just in it, split up. These are the pages of the novel that fit each part of the story. And I just think it's so cool to be able to see that, because it just shows that every story has structure. Or let me take that back. Every story that's commercially successful has structure. And it has the same structure, generic structure. And then you get creative with how you use it. And I think this is a really good version of that. So, to get started, the book actually has what I consider 2 hooks. So first there's a prologue, and in the prologue we just meet our protagonist, Lexi Smart, and she is just kind of showing us where she is in her life. So it's, they're out with her friends at this bar, and everybody's excited and celebrating because they all got raises, and she's the only one who didn't get one. She's also upset because her boyfriend didn't show up when he was supposed to show up, hang out with them, and he didn't show up. And it's raining, and she's outside trying to get a taxi. She goes running, and she slips and falls. And that's where the prologue ends, with her falling. And we know most likely she's going to hit her face and have a serious problem. So, that kind of hooks you in a lot of ways, and you need to keep reading. But really, the hook happens on page 19. So we open chapter 1 with the character, Lexi. She is in the hospital, and automatically you think, okay, she hurt herself in the prologue and now she's in the hospital because of it. But then something weird happens. Page 19. She is talking to the nurse, and she says, "Wouldn't it be great if just once, just one time, life fell magically into place?" And then the next sentence right after that, we see that things are not quite what we thought they were 19 pages before. So she is actually in the hospital, but not for the reason she thinks. So she actually discovers that she crashed her Mercedes, which is puzzling to her because she didn't have a Mercedes. And she looks at her nails. Her nails are perfectly manicured. Her hair is gorgeous and long and silky. She has perfectly straight teeth, none of which she had in the prologue. So all of a sudden you're hooked. What is going on? How is it that she was one way in the prologue when we know this was, current, and then she's different now? So it turns out that the story actually starts 3 years after the prologue, but we don't know that yet until we get to this hook part and we start seeing that, wait a second, something's weird's going on. So automatically we're bought in. We need to see what happens next, or at least I did. I had to keep going and see what happened next because it was just very puzzling that, you would think the prologue was the setup for this, and really it was foreshadowing of all these earlier things that happened. So we get into the story and we basically, are learning where she's at. She's still in the hospital. We're meeting this new husband that she has. All of a sudden, she has this just fantastic, husband who's just really good looking, and he owns this company, and he sells homes in London, and he makes all this money, and she lives in this like fancy, expensive loft. All of these things, which the character in the prologue never had, none of it. And so it really makes you wonder, like, what is happening? How is this going? And so the first plot point happens on page 79, and this is when we are told by the doctor that she has lost her short-term memory and she has what they call retrograde amnesia. So she is forgetting 3 years of her life up to this point. And obviously we knew this was coming in some ways because it was being set up that she was forgetting things. She didn't know how she got where she is currently, so all of this was set up. But at the first plot point is when meaning comes into the story. So this is when we find out what it means, what everything that's had, been going on through the beginning of the story, we find out what it means at the first plot point. And what it means is that she has amnesia. So now we're pushed into part 2 of the story when she's going to be reacting to this happening. So, she decides to go home with her husband and try to jog her memory. The doctor tells her getting back into her regular life will make her remember stuff probably. And so she just really goes home, starts kind of reacting. So at this point, she's not taking action. She's not trying to find out what happened to her life. She's not, actively trying to figure out what happened. She's just kind of letting things happen as they come. So she goes home. Her husband had made her this marriage manual where he tells her everything about their life together so that she can try to jog her memory. But it's just really strange to her, all these things, because the person she was in the prologue, which is the only person she remembers being, is clearly not this person she's been for the last 3 years. So it's very confusing for her, but she's just freaked out and scared, and she doesn't know, what's happened, but she's not ready to start finding out what's happened yet. She's just still, reacting to the first plot point and to finding out that she has amnesia. So, right now she's just letting it come. And then we have a moment that happens, called the pinch point. It happens on page 150. So, she's still reacting to the first plot point, and we find out, again, that she has amnesia. And so she is at work. She's chasing her friends out of the building because they ditched her, and she's trying to figure out why, because they're her friends. Why wouldn't they wait for her to have lunch? So she goes outside to talk to them, and it turns out that they're not friends anymore. So something happened 3 years ago that she doesn't remember, but all of a sudden they're not friends anymore. And all these people that she, has been friends with her whole life and all of this, suddenly they're just not friends anymore. So something happened. She doesn't remember what. This stopped them from being friends. So this is a reminder of the antagonist, which is her amnesia. And it's a good reminder of it because, clearly, because she doesn't remember the fact that these people aren't her friends anymore, then she knows that she must have done something pretty bad because these people have been her friends since she was a kid. So it's very strange to her. So now we're setting up for the midpoint, which is when a context shift is going to come into play. But in this story, because of the midpoint being what it is, it needed something set up much earlier in the story. So on page 169, we have a situation happen where basically, Lexi, earlier in this part of the story, she's basically in the parking garage of her building. She's trying to drive this Mercedes that she owns. She doesn't remember how to drive because the Lexi from the prologue didn't know how to drive, and that's the only Lexi she remembers being. So she's driving, she's about to crash the car again, and some random guy comes running toward her and says, hit the brakes, hit the brakes. So she hits the brakes, and she stops. And he says, why don't you get out and I'll park the car for you, because she clearly can't remember how to drive a stick shift. So he gets in the car and drives it for her, parks it. And, he's looking at her and asking, like, how are you not remembering this? Like, and she's like, oh, I was in an accident. I have amnesia. I don't remember anything. She doesn't recognize this guy at all. But clearly he seems to be dancing around the fact that they know each other in some way. But she has no idea who he is. But he's asking her things, making it seem like he doesn't believe that she really has amnesia. He alludes to the fact that she's faking it, which is weird to her because, again, she doesn't know who this guy is, So then on page 169, which is about 20 pages before the midpoint happens, we get this other hint of something that's coming. And it's a big one. And it's easy to even think that this is the midpoint, except that it doesn't shift the story yet. So she's still reacting after this point. She's not taking any action yet. And the difference between what separates part 2, reacting, from part 3, taking action, is the midpoint. And so that's how we know that this moment isn't the midpoint yet. So what happens is her and her husband are throwing a dinner party. He wants to reintroduce her to all their friends and just help her to start, jogging her memory, get to know who all these people are again. So the same guy from the parking garage is there at the dinner. It turns out he's the architect who works with her husband and helps build these homes. So they, are talking a little bit, and he's still acting strange around her. And then she says, I'm going to go get coffee for everybody. And he jumps up immediately and says, let me help you. So they go in the kitchen. And again, he asks her, you don't remember anything? You're not lying about this amnesia. It's real. And she's like, I don't know why you keep asking me that. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I really have amnesia. And this is when he tells her something kind of crazy. He tells her that they've been having an affair and that she doesn't love her husband. She loves him. And they actually had plans for her to leave him and for them to run away together. Now, this comes as a total shock to her because, number one, she's not that kind of person. Number two, it just doesn't seem like anything she would do. And yet he's saying it to her with such confidence that it makes her question, is this really true? And he says to her, you don't know anything about your life. And then he leaves. So again, it's easy to think this is the midpoint because something really crazy has kind of come in and happened. But it doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't impart any meaning, and it doesn't shift her into the next part of the story. She's still reacting at this point. So that's how you know it's not the midpoint. Now the midpoint, and this one's a doozy, it happens on page 201. So she's at this opening event for her husband's launch. His homes are launching. They're having this big, launch party. And the architect asks her if she'll go with him to, finish getting this fish tank thing set up or whatever. So she goes with him. And, hi, how are you? She goes with him. And they're in this room, and they're putting the rocks in the fish tank, and he's still trying to talk to her about this, affair they've been having. And again, she doesn't believe him. She thinks he's totally making it up, and she just really believes that he's lying. Thank you. Because again, she doesn't remember him. She doesn't remember any of this stuff, and clearly in the prologue, she was not the kind of person who would do anything like that. So she doesn't believe him. And then something happens. It's on page 201. And basically what happens is he grabs her hand. And as he does that, he starts, just like holding it and like kind of rubbing the top of her hand or whatever. And suddenly she can't move. Her skin is fizzing. She's feeling all these weird emotions coming up. And she's just feeling like, what the hell? Like, why does this feel good to me? She doesn't know who this guy is. She doesn't remember him. But all of a sudden her body remembers something that her mind doesn't. Boom. Midpoint. This is when we're shifted into the next part of the story because this is enough now for her to go, okay, something is going on and I need to find out what it is. So now we are shifted into part 3 of the story. Now she's finally ready to stop reacting and start taking action to find out what happened 3 years ago, why she doesn't remember any of it. For anyone who just joined, I'm going through a deconstruction of the book Remember Me. It's by Sophie Kinsella. I'm breaking down the structure of it, and we just hit the midpoint. If you play this video again after it's finished, you can catch the beginning where I explain the rest of how we got to the midpoint. So now she's ready to start attacking. So now this is in the part of the story where, you're welcome. This is in the part of the story where she starts taking action. So she starts going back in through videos that she has of this thing that she did at work back 3 years ago. She's asking questions. She's starting to talk to people about what happened. She's actively pursuing what happened. She wants to know what happened 3 years ago. Prior to this, she wasn't willing to do any of that stuff. The midpoint is what finally convinced her that she has to start taking action, discover what happened, why she doesn't remember any of it, and how she became this new person that she doesn't recognize. So we go through all of that, and, she's studying things. She's trying to find out what happened. She's trying to be more proactive with her husband because she thinks this guy can't be telling the truth. He has to be lying to her. So she tries to just make sure that he isn't by, asking questions about things and just trying to be a wife to her husband. But she discovers that she's not quite feeling the same way about her husband as she is about this guy that she doesn't recognize, doesn't remember, which is strange to her, And then we come to pinch point 2. So they're again at this home launch thing, and he's the architect for these homes, so that's why he's always there. And, he's still wanting to talk to her. He tries to convince her that she needs to meet him secretly and let him tell her all these things about their life that she can't remember. And again, she's still not convinced that this guy is telling the truth, so she just doesn't want to listen to him. But anyhow, she ends up, again, alone in a room with him, and he kisses her. And all of a sudden, it's like just crazy emotions coming up again, even more so than when he touched her hand. It's becoming just, she doesn't want him to stop. She wants him to keep kissing her. She wants him to kiss her in a way she didn't want her husband to. And this is how she knows that something has to be going on for real, that maybe he is telling the truth in some way. She doesn't totally believe it yet, but she knows that she couldn't be feeling like this. Even if she doesn't remember, in her mind, her body remembers something that her mind isn't remembering. And so this is a very good reminder of what's at stake. So, being the pinch point, it really shows us that, she has, first of all, this is bringing the amnesia back to center stage to show that she's not remembering something that clearly her body remembers. And then she's still determined to find out what happened. So now she's, starting to be willing to talk to the guy a little bit more, and she's, asking questions. She decides to meet him secretly, even though she was against it all this time. But finally she's like, okay, I need to meet this guy. I need to hear his side of the story, hear what he has to say, and maybe he'll say something that will jog my memory. So he basically sits down with her, in a coffee shop and tells her that the reason that she decided to change everything about herself and become this totally different person 3 years ago. And it was the fact that the day after the prologue, it was her dad's funeral, and the bailiffs showed up to bankrupt them, basically saying her dad had spent all this money, took all these loans out that now needed to be paid by her and her mom and her sister. And, of course, none of them could afford it at the time. And so Lexi just stepped up and decided she was going to handle it all. And so she starts, paying off the bills. She changed her entire look. So she, got what she considered good looking so that she could go on this TV show, try to make money. So she's doing all these things, but this is stuff she doesn't remember. And when he tells her this, it finally all makes sense. Yes, this is something that happened to basically make me believe that I would turn into this person. Because up till now, she doesn't believe that she could have become this person. Something had to have happened that did, made her become this person. And so finally, we have all the information, we have all the pieces of the puzzle, and now Lexi has everything she needs to now become the hero into part 4 of the story and to defeat the antagonist, which is her amnesia. So the second plot point happens on 327 in the book, and finally, like I said, everything's making sense to her. She's finally starting to believe that she really is having an affair with this guy, that he really does know what he's talking about, that her husband is not who she thought he was, and that her life is not this happy-go-lucky, fantasy that she imagined from the beginning of the story. So now she's in part 4. This is when she's becoming the martyr. She is ready to do whatever it takes to defeat her amnesia, find out what's really been going on, get her friends back, save the day, all that stuff. And so that's what she does. And I won't tell you all of the information because I don't want to spoil it in case anyone decides to go and read this now. But she, in the end, overcomes the amnesia. She never remembers everything, but she has done enough to believe that what she's been told is true. She ends up leaving her husband. She ends up breaking things off with the other guy. She goes and saves her job, saves her friends, and all of that. And then right at the end of the story, we have a moment where she recognizes a memory. And I I won't, again, I won't go into it, but she recognizes a memory and she realizes that she did have a history with this guy. And even though she can't remember anything else about him or about their life together, clearly this one memory is a connecting point to the two of them. And so she goes after him and she gets back together with him. And of course, it's a love story, but even with a love story, you have to have something else going on. So it can't just be, how two people, meet and fall in love. That's not really a story. That's a partial story, but there has to be more to it. And so in this story, it's her getting this love story going by overcoming her antagonist, which is the amnesia. And then she also obviously has her inner demons that she's dealing with, which is the fact that she, well, number one, doesn't remember anything, but also she is not this person that she's made herself to be for the last 3 years. And so because of that, she's, having to overcome it and having to accept that she did these things and that she can't go back and change it, because even though she doesn't remember it, everyone else does. And so she can only move forward and make amends for what she's had happen from here on. But that's how she defeated the antagonist, both internal and external, and saved the day and became the hero. And the reason I love this story so much is because, so many love stories are so cliche and just so like, guy meets girl, guy loves girl, girl doesn't love guy, something happens to stop them from being together, they get together at the end. And I think she just did that in such a good way and such a engaging way. But again, I'm going to show you the 4 parts of story just to show you that, all commercially successful novels have structure, have 4 parts of story, and the plot points that separate them. And this is just to show where they land in this particular book. So I hope this was interesting to you, and I hope it helped you to learn a little bit more about how story structure works and how it can be used to really keep the reader hooked and engaged through the entire story. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up. And if you want to see a written up version of what I just talked you through, you can if you go to Google and type in Remember Me and then storyfix.com. I actually did, you're welcome. I did a deconstruction of this on that blog, and it's all written out for you so you can see it, if you want to read it versus watching this video. So yeah, just go to Google and type in Remember Me and storyfix.com, and it will come up right at the top. So you can check it out. Thanks for joining me for this Periscope. I will be back on Friday to share something really fun and cool that's happening next week for me. And I think it'll be something really useful for you as well. So be sure to check that out. I'll be 2 p.m. Eastern on Friday. And if you want more great tips and information about writing really kick-ass stories, be sure to check out my blog, JenniferBlanchard.net. And I will catch you next time. Bye.